introduction. So Mark has been he's been in the design industry and was influenced very early on by Buckminster Fuller, who was one of his professors at university. But it wasn't until 15 years ago, Mark tells me, that his daughter, a marine biologist, made him realise that climate change was a serious issue. And as a businessman, he's helped found the Corporate Climate Alliance. Randy, you'll see in the notes, and I won't repeat what it says in the notes because it's in front of you, has probably a more radical view, and I'm looking forward to the discussion about the role of business in our solution providing. So let me start maybe with Mark as I take a seat. Mark, can you tell us about the Corporate Climate Alliance?
Yes. About a year ago, we started to put the components of the Corporate Climate Alliance together, and probably about a month ago, our website went live. What we're dedicated to is bringing corporations, the C-suites of corporations together that are concerned about the business risks that climate change is purporting to their balance sheets. So we feel that if we can get businesses to understand some of the risks that are out there, that we're going to be able to get a critical mass of them together to start to affect change. We're a 501c4 organization. We have a U.S. focus and a Midwestern base. And we really believe that corporations are largely responsible for this problem, and corporations are really best positioned to try to solve it. So that's a little bit about us.
Okay, well, tell us more about the corporate social responsibility angle and how you address that.
Yeah, that's, I think it's not just about social responsibility. It's a real component of what we're going to try to move forward. But it's what we're going to try to convince corporations of is this is about their survivability. If we can't get them to understand that the business risks of supply chain disruption, discontinuation of insurance, as Steve Schofield mentioned, you've got investors that are becoming skeptical of what corporations are doing, crop devastation, all these things enter into business risk. And we feel if we can appeal to that side of their balance sheet, and then, which would be the more negative side, and then start to appeal to the social responsibility side, which would mean cleaning up their acts, let's say trying to get them to understand the benefits of solar power, using less water, and becoming good stewards of the environment, that they're actually going to see their profits increase. And there are definite models out there that we can look to for the proof of this. And I'll talk a little bit more about that later.
Yeah, it's one of these issues you face, isn't it, is that those companies that try to transition to a new economy face some unexpected risks. I mean, one of the individuals involved with the B team is David Crane, who was until recently running NRG in the US, who many of you will know. And David was asked to leave the company in December, because of the share price performance. And he was in a very leading way, transitioning that company from being a classic old fossil fuel business to a modern renewable energy company. What he found was that investors didn't actually follow him through this transition. There are those investors that actually support, and you think about analysts in banks, that they support and they understand fossil fuels. And there's a bunch of analysts over here that understand renewable energy. But actually, supporting the transition for some of these companies is very difficult to achieve, and it's very difficult for investors to support this so-called death valley. And it runs down to this whole theory of how much do we go out there supporting these companies, back to this divest invest debate, versus how much do we actually just attack them and support new models and new entrepreneurs. Maybe Randy, heading towards you on this theme. Randy, can we start by actually talking about your background and what's formed some of the basis of your thinking around the role of business in helping solve? Just give us some background to your experiences.
Well, when I started the Rainforest Action Network in 1985, I looked at the Reagan administration and I didn't see a friend in terms of saving the rainforest. I didn't think the federal government in the United States was going to be much of an ally there in terms of, say, the import of rainforest beef from tropical rainforest areas. Was it Clayton Uter? Was one of the cabinet members there? It was just, it was the kind of free market mania. And to me, when Ronald Reagan beat out Jimmy Carter for a second term for Carter, that's probably when we lost the chance to save the planet and life as we know it. Because then we had 12 years of Reagan and Bush Sr. And Reagan was a very powerful, mouthpiece for Milton Friedman's economics. And to me, Milton Friedman and Ronald Reagan, let me go ahead and just be a little tough and demonic in my own language, are the two most demonic characters in American history. Now, I know that some people here aren't gonna like that. But free trade is not free from ecological limits, and when one says business created the problem and so business is well positioned to solve it, I understand that and I endorse some of that, but why would you want the fox to guard the hen house? Look at who created the problem. And I'm a firm believer that you've got to both stop the bad and start the good, right? And the environmental movement, I think, can be fairly criticized as not doing enough starting of good, right? And focusing on stopping the bad, but they don't even do that very well, to be honest, and so I don't look to them, the environmental movement, to save the day. I don't look to business to save the day. I don't actually see a strategy yet to save the day. In my little talk yesterday, I laid out my 6-point plan to save the day. It's so conceptual that it's hard for me to really be terribly optimistic or hopeful.
I think it's going to take a lot of different solutions. It's going to, as someone said, it's going to take a shotgun approach for us to really get to the solutions to the problem. And it's not just, I was talking to a CEO the other day, and he said, this is like a big rock that you're trying to break. He said that it takes a lot of sledgehammer hits to the rock, and the last one may be the one to break it, but it was the 10 hits before that really made the difference in the rock breaking. So it's going to be business, it's going to be government, it's going to be, it's going to take everyone in this room, everyone on the planet to try to help solve this problem.
I would say, Randy,
I think it's all hands on deck. I'm with you on that, right? and I really am. But well, you've.
I think, Randy, I think dealing with companies, what I would say is there's a hell of a lot of greenwashing that goes on out there, and there's going to be more. This is now that sort of everyone's starting to get the issue around climate change. It's actually not very hard to throw out figures and facts and disclose things that pretend to show that you're doing something about it. And maybe there's a bit being done about it. What I'm also seeing is a lot of companies in a particular, the materiality of what they're having is not being addressed by their response. And we've got to keep bringing them back to actually address the key impacts that those companies are having. So maybe, Randy, on the point about civil disobedience and protest, can you tell us about your views on that as an effective method of change? And to what extent do you think companies respond to it? Do you think the government's responding to it in the right way? And this goes back into history as well. But what's your view on this issue, and how much do you want to see more mobilisation of civil disobedience as part of the solution?
Well, and going back to the birth of the Rainforest Action Network, our first campaign was the Burger King boycott. And again, we started going after corporations because, again, we didn't want to locate ourselves in Washington, D.C. and try to work with the federal government to get America's foot off the throat of the tropical rainforests of the planet. You know, we just didn't think that strategy was going to work. So you go to the big companies that are causing the problem. And Burger King, you know, imported $35 million worth of rainforest beef from Costa Rica. We didn't know that at the time, but we didn't have political power, and we didn't have financial power, but we could organize people power, right? And so we also realized that common sense and reason were really insufficient. You know, Donella Meadows in The Limits to Growth 45 years ago said everything we needed to know about having a semi-elegant transition to a more socially just, ecologically sustainable society. We didn't get the job done. It didn't happen. It didn't happen in large part because of a lot of trade associations from corporations, by the way. I think they're just highly immoral. And when you look at the extractive industries and the trade associations, you know, what's the B team going to do on that? I loved your presentation. You mimicked some of the major points I made in my talk yesterday about the unanticipated consequences and planetary boundaries, right, and all of that. So I think you and I are on the same page in a lot of ways. But I really distrust, and I'll get to civil disobedience, but you know, distrust corporations as the leader, and I want more of you being the leader, absolutely, within your own circles. But it's a first to do no harm strategy, and the very nature of extractive industries is doing harm. You know, and so few people are talking about the circular economy in any meaningful way, and the idea of it getting up to scale and business leading other business when businesses primarily need to protect their business model and their you know, their market share and their profits. You know, they're just not in a position where they're versatile. It's not easy to make money in business. It's not easy to. You can really lose your shirt fast. You know, and so I just don't see the real innovation and flexibility and change coming there from them. So the civil disobedience thing, you know, I can sit and criticize the environmental movement and already have a little bit. Their demand set is usually really insufficient. They're stuck in the mode with civil disobedience, and I was part of this, fighting brush fires. You know, we thought we had a bit of a domino strategy. Okay, we didn't have evidence on McDonald's buying rainforest beef. We had evidence on Burger King buying it. McDonald's was the biggest, Burger King was the second. Well, if we can knock off Burger King, maybe the other dominoes will fall, right? That was the same strategy. The domino strategy is what we used with Home Depot. Home Depot is the largest seller of wood on planet Earth, right? And we took them on, you know. And it was only through tough love, i.e. nonviolent civil disobedience, that we could get them to change. Now, you know, the more mainstream environmental groups like NRDC, Environmental Defense Fund, National Wildlife Federation, World Wildlife Fund US, they never liked Rainforest Action Network. They didn't like Randy Hayes very much, most of them, you know. Yeah, but they ended up being the ones who got invited in after we were the barbarians at the gate. But the gates wouldn't have even opened up for an NRDC to go into Home Depot and then help them get rid of the old growth wood off their shelves had we not beat the hell out of them. We had 113 demonstrations on one day across the country and in the major cities of Canada against Home Depot. You know, if you have, you know, the heads of so many of those companies across the country calling up to Atlanta, Georgia, to Central Command saying, what the hell's going on? I got people hanging off the side of my building. I got people dressed up like toucans and monkeys, chaining themselves to my front door. So the day before our demonstrations, we got a phone call at Rainforest Action Network, and I get on the phone, and it's somebody who worked at Home Depot and said, we understand you're doing demonstrations. Did you happen to know what the code is for the intercom in all of our stores across the country? It's the same code. And they gave us the code, right? So we would go over to the intercom right in the store and say, good afternoon, all you shoppers. Did you know about how we're destroying the Amazon with our mahogany doors in aisle 6? Come on over and take a look at them, right? you know? And, you know, and of course security and employees would rush over to aisle 6, you know, and we'd get on the intercom in a different part of the store and say, good afternoon again, all you Home Depot shoppers. Did you know how we're destroying Southeast Asian rainforests with our wood dowels? Come on over to aisle 10. You know, so these theatrics are not unimportant, and they're part of civil disobedience. And God damn it, they get the job done. You've got to get the media attention. You've got to give these corporations a black eye to get their attention. You've got to get them down on one bended knee. And you've got to sit down then at the bargaining table with a position of power, not over them, but a position of power alongside of them. I'm happy to sit down and orchestrate some kind of a solution with corporations, and we did that. You know, with Burger King, with Home Depot, with Scott Paper Company, with Mitsubishi, with Citibank, you know, and many more. But here's where I failed even at that, and I had more successes than many in terms of that. But our demand set was voluntary codes of conduct. And what happened with that, you know? Is Burger King using rainforest beef right now? I damn well bet they are. Did Home Depot get all of the wood off of its shelf initially? I can go into their store now and find lots of old growth wood yet again. These voluntary codes of conduct, it's got to be at a deeper, more systemic level of change. And I honor and welcome the B team and your approach. I don't think it will, you know, the more the merrier, but it's not enough.
One of the, yeah, well said.
Oh, let me mention one other little theatrical thing, which was just our very first demonstration with Burger King. We had a couple of activists dress up in a papier-mâché life-size cow, right? You can picture it easily. The front legs was one person, and the back legs was another person. We had a third person with a basket of leaves. That was the tropical rainforest, and we would go out in front of Burger King at lunchtime when all their business comes in, because we're trying to give them a black eye in the press. And that's because we got the corporate cold shoulder, by the way. You know, we wrote to them, they didn't answer. We called them, they didn't return our calls, and so we took it to the streets. And so a person in the front of the papier-mâché cow would reach out, grab some leaves, and the person in the back would take those styrofoam clam shells and stuff it out the hind end of the cow, defecating styrofoam after eating the rainforest, you know. Stupid theatrics, but it gets the media attention, and it pisses off the company to the point they start returning your calls and returning your letters, you know. And, you know, B team's not going to do stuff like that. You'll use other leverage points. But I can tell you, you know.
I haven't actually raised it with our board yet about what our official position is on civil disobedience. So I'll raise it at our next board meeting. But personally, Randy, I absolutely support you. I think it's, you know, we need to mobilise not just the new generation of young people to take action, but all of us. And you know, I think at times we all feel a bit powerless to get the change that we need. And so, you know, there are forms of civil disobedience and protest that are absolutely critical for change. And it reminds me of when I was reading the IEA report, the International Energy Association report, looking at over the proportion of oil and gas and coal as part of the energy mix in 2050. They still forecast as being a huge proportion of the world's energy demand in 2050. Well, there's not one mentioning in that report, that huge volume, not one mention around what happens to people as we go from 1 degree to 1.1 to 1.2 to 1.5 to 1.7 to 2. You know, it just completely undersells the reaction of people in the world who will react as our ecosystems start getting more and more destroyed. And so it's so easy, being an ex-banker, that you develop a long-term financial model that's linear. But of course, it's very hard to factor in, you know, civil response to these issues. Maybe going to some of our heroes. Maybe Mark, think about some of the corporate leadership, you know, in the context of, you know, the radical change that we need.
Right.
Can you give us some examples that you really look up to?
Yeah. You know, we're not all bad. There's a lot of good corporations out there, and you know, I totally agree with Randy that, you know, there's a lot of bad ones too. But one of our partners in CCA is Interface Carpet, and I think a lot of you may be familiar with them. Their CEO, Ray Anderson, read The Ecology of Commerce by Paul Hawken about 20 years ago. And he realized that his company could not go forward doing the same things it was doing. So he started on a concept called Mission Zero, that by 2020, the company would have a cradle-to-cradle system that would not inject any carbon into the air anymore. Now, you know, there's Amory Lovins, William McDonough were part of the dream team that he put together to create this. But now Interface is looking even further, saying that we have to take the next step. And that, actually, it speaks to a lot of the things that Klaus and Gisela had talked about, and it's carbon sequestration. And they're going to actually try to accomplish this within the way they make their products. So there's a little clip I'd like to run here they just introduced this last week at a large interiors and furniture conference in Chicago. And if you could run that now, I think it has some meaning. That is carpet that you see in the machine.
So it might be, I think we've all got corporate heroes out there. I think, Randy, I hope we've got some corporate heroes. But I was meeting with the CEO of Patagonia a couple of months ago, and I mean, they're a company I love, because to start talking about actually not buy things and to reduce consumption is a really tough thing in our current system. It's a bit back to the example I used about cars. How do we develop a new car system that is electric? How do we get every car in the world to be sold that is electric, but actually reduces the number of cars on the road? So using a combination of sharing as well as potentially driverless vehicles, as opposed to, when you look at the streets of San Francisco today, I'm convinced that Uber has actually increased the number of cars on the road because it's actually cheaper to drive. So maybe we've just got one last very quick question, and Red, I'd love to come back to you about the role of companies. This is just a very quick one. Is in the context there of corporate-led corporate-led economic globalization, or corporate-led role, what is the solution? You always talk about civil disobedience, but what would you regard as the single most important thing that either governments or society or people or companies should be doing to drive the change that's necessary?
Well, governments, if you look at the major sectors of society, you can break it down differently, of course, right? But in a simple sense, you've got commerce. Okay, that's a big chunk of the pie, right? And you have governance, right? And we used to have something called the free press. Now it's more called the mass media. Let's put commerce in the center of that pie right now at the top, and put government over here and put free press over here. Guess who controls a lot of public governance these days? Corporations. We have kind of as much of a corporate democracy here in the United States as we have a democracy. And that's true for a lot of countries, north, south, east, and west, right? And so that's another sense of my distrust with corporate leadership, corporate-led approach. And also, what's the role of free press? It was to checks and balances against all the other sectors of society, whether it was civil society or higher education or religion or commerce or government. Free press should be, but if it's taken over by the corporations, where's your checks and balances? Well, government should be the regulator and checks and balances on lots of things too. That's its legitimate role. But if it's taken over by a lot of corporate influence, in the sense of campaign finance corruption in the United States and Citizens United, we're screwed, right? And so that's not getting to a positive solution, which was part of your question there, but it's just to say that that's the other dilemma. So we have to put the public back into public governance. We have to radically decrease corporate influence of public governance. I would say that's the answer.
Yeah, well said. I can assure you that Rupert Murdoch is not on our list of leaders for the B team, but anyway, put that aside. So thank you for the conversation. I think I've enjoyed it, and there's a lot of different disparate views about the role of business. I don't think we've got time for questions, do we? So I apologise that we haven't got time for questions, but thank you again, everyone.